Hello everyone and welcome to another Middle Game episode with Coach B and masteryourchess.com. In this video, we're going to learn how to take decisions in the middle game to favor the imbalances for our minor pieces, especially when dealing with the knight versus bishop game. Ultimately, the real value of the minor pieces depends on the combined imbalances of the board. If the position is closed or you have a passed pawn in the endgame where you need to be able to access both colors, having a knight will give you the advantage. But if the game is open or you have multiple passed pawns, especially if they are far apart, the bishop is your key piece. The following things are critical in all bishop and knight battles. First of all, be aware that there is, or it's going to be, a bishop versus knight battle. Be aware of all the imbalances and how they relate to the minor pieces you or your opponent own. And then create a board situation that will favor the minor piece that you have. And we're going to learn how to do that in this video. In this position, on the surface, things look easy. White has two bishops and would like to open things up, while black has a bishop and knight and would be happy if he could activate his bishop and find a nice home for his horse. The main questions here are, should white take on e5, push to d5, or simply ignore the face-off between the d4 and e5 pawns altogether? All these decisions are dependent on how they will ultimately affect the state of the minor pieces, but achieving the optimum goals proves far harder than one might think. So let's take a look and see how each of those responses will affect your game. First, let's look at d5. This pawn move gains space, kills off the black's bishop hope for an open a1 to h8 diagonal, and deprives the knight of the c6 square. These things certainly sound great, but they actually fail after black's thematic reply, bishop to g5. White suddenly has nothing. Black's move forces the exchange of the dark square bishops. This deprives white of his bishop pair, and after bishop takes on g5 and queen takes on g5, this creates a new minor piece battle of knight versus an inactive bishop. As a general rule, if your opponent has two bishops, exchange one off and create a more manageable bishop versus bishop or bishop versus knight scenario. Two bishops with an open game are deadly. Coming back, let's see what happens if white ignores the battle between the two pawns and responds with something like queen to d2. After this, black will respond with e takes d4. After that, bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, knight to c6, queen to c3, rook e8, rook f to e1, knight to e5, bishop to e2, and then queen to g5. And here, black has no problems. His knight is a good piece, white's bishop isn't very impressive, and his central pawn majority isn't going anywhere. Black also enjoys some pressure against e4. Here, white cannot continue with playing c5 because after d takes c5, queen takes c5, knight f3 check opens up a discovery on the white queen and black is winning. Coming back, if here white responds with g3, black will play knight to d7, which uncovers the rook so that the e4 pawn is attacked. It also opens up the e5 square for the black's queen and also creates the possibility of knight to c5. From here, white can respond with bishop to f3, queen to e5, queen takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop to e2, knight to c6, bishop to g4, knight to d4, and after rook a to d1 and c5, we could see clearly that black is winning the minor piece battle. The knight has found a permanent home on d4 with a very active position. So let's come back and let's open up the game with d takes on e5. Now, this is not necessarily a trivial decision because white has to worry about d takes e5, which is giving his opponent a lock on the d4 square after knight to c6. Though this sounds impressive for black, it turns out that white is going to have a very strong initiative. So here, white will move the queen to b3, after which black will respond with b6, Coming back, I do want to mention that queen to c8 is not good because after bishop to g4 challenging the queen, that pawn will be lost. So after b6, white will respond with rook a to d1, queen to e7, bishop to g4, and then bishop to g5. Coming back, knight to c6, it's not good because it allows rook to d7 with a very strong position. So a better reply is bishop to g5, from which white will respond with an excellent move, c5. This not only gives the white queen active possibilities on the a2 to g8 diagonal, but it also allows the light square bishop to be active even if it's driven back from g4 to e2 to c4 and so on. Here black responds bishop takes a3 and white will respond with f takes on e3. Even though you get doubled up pawns, this is actually very good for white. It opens up the f file with a strong attack on the enemy king together with the queen, and it also takes away black's dream coming with the knight to c6 and to d4, as this is no longer available. Here black responds with king to h8. I do want to mention that queen takes on c5 is not good, because after rook takes on f7, rook takes f7, rook to d8 check, queen to f8, rook takes on f8, king takes on f8, queen to d5 attacking the rook on a8. The only move to save the rook is knight to c6, and after white captures that knight, white is totally winning. So after king to h8, white replies with queen to c4, then g6, hoping to chase away the bishop by h6 to h5 next. Here white responds with queen to c3. Coming back, c6 is also a good move here, trapping the knight, but queen to c3 was played. And now black responded with f6. If queen takes on c5 here, after queen takes c5, b takes c5, and rook to d5, white has a huge advantage. So after f6, rook to d5, h5, and bishop to e2, it's clear that the bishop is superior to the knight. Coming back from the beginning, does d takes e5 simply mean that white is better? Well, not necessarily. Black lost the battle because he didn't do enough to make his knight challenge the white bishop. So let's step back and see what happens if black plays a more principled move here. So after black responds with d takes e5 and queen to b3, here better for black is moving the knight to c6, even though he's sacrificing a pawn. What he gets in return is an active knight. After queen takes b7 and knight to d4, if white responds with bishop takes d4, e takes d4, and after e5 and rook to b8, this is actually very good for black. And coming back, if white moves the bishop to g4, after a5, queen to d5, queen to e7, c5, and rook a to b8, this gives black a good compensation for the sacrificed pawn. And coming back from the beginning, after d takes on e5, some of you were also probably wondering why can't black here just simply capture back with the bishop. So let's take a look to see where this leads as well. So after this, white can reply with c5, knight to c6, c takes d6, queen takes d6, queen takes d6, bishop takes d6, rook f to d1, rook f to d8, bishop to e2, bishop to e5, rook a to b1, bishop to d4, bishop f4, bishop e5, bishop takes on e5, knight takes e5, and then f4. And here, white's central pawn majority and active bishop grants him a more pleasant position, though black's knight is still hoping to make an impact going to c6 and then to d4 at some point. Coming back after the bishop took on e5, white can also reply with bishop to g4, knight to c6, f4, bishop takes on b2, rook to b1, bishop f6, rook takes on b7, knight to a5 attacking the pawn on c4, rook to b4 protecting it, after c5, rook to a4, queen to c7, bishop to f3, and knight to c6, where white has a small advantage thanks to his two center bishops. So as we've seen in this video, it's very important to be aware when it's going to be a knight versus bishop battle and to create a board situation that will favor your minor piece. So make sure to be aware of all the imbalances and how they relate to the minor piece that you have, and that should guide your decisions of any exchanges. If you liked my video, please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new website, masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.